It seems that life is very different for all of us during the present lockdown. We cannot do what we normally do, but at the same time, we may have opportunities to be doing things which are rare for us all. As everything is more or less shut down and we are prohibited from making close connections with individuals, my wife and I have been taking the opportunity to explore different parts of our neighbourhood as we have walked the dog. It's been very interesting to meet up with people in the congregation and also with people out with the congregation and to spend time speaking with them. We have, though, always remembered to keep our distance. But it's been an encouragement for us. We are all in the same situation, and we do indeed surely need to look out for one another. Fairly recently, though, we received in the post a prayer letter from a lady whom we knew many years ago, who has served for many years as a missionary overseas. And it was very interesting that in that prayer letter, in mentioning the current emergency with the coronavirus, she referred to 7 national calls to prayer which took place during the Second World War. And I have to say that although I never knew that such calls had taken place, I found that what I was able to discover about them was a great challenge and even encouragement in our present circumstances. And so please allow me to share what I was able to glean about the first call to prayer in the early summer of 1940. May 1940 was a time of grave crisis for the British Empire and the whole civilized world. On May the 10th, Hitler had launched his blitzkrieg against the Low Countries and France. By the end of the second week in May, the French defences had been broken. German forces burst through, and with lightning speed, they began a rapid advance across France and Belgium. And very soon they were threatening the British Army, and our forces were being obliged to withdraw. And back at home, Churchill feared that he would have to announce the greatest military disaster in our history. While on May the 27th, the German High Command were boasting that the British Army was encircled and that our troops were heading for annihilation. And with the entire front collapsing rapidly, the decision was reached at home to evacuate our forces from the continent. But the only port from which this could be done was Dunkirk, and the situation there was very precarious. Our forces were surrounded on land on 3 sides, and on the other side there was the English Channel. It was estimated that out of 250,000 men, only about 20,000, or at the very most 30,000, could ever be saved. The whole root and core of the British Army seemed about to perish or to be led into captivity. Everything seemed to be lost. But what happened? Well, King George VI, on seeing this developing, requested that Sunday, May the 26th, be observed as a national day of prayer. In a stirring broadcast, he called the people of Britain to commit their cause to God. And together with members of the cabinet, the king attended Westminster Abbey, while millions flocked to churches to join in prayer. Britain was given inspiring leadership, and people responded immediately. The whole nation would seem to have been at prayer that Sunday. Churches were packed, with people queuing to get inside. Newspapers reported that nothing like that had ever happened before. In its hour of deep distress, the nation went to God in prayer. And that cry did not go unanswered, because very soon at least 3 miracles were seen to happen. The first miracle was that for some reason, which has never been fully explained, Hitler overruled his generals and halted the advance of the armoured columns at the very point where they could have proceeded to the British Army's annihilation. They were in fact only 10 miles away. In fact, had they proceeded to fight, the destruction of the Allied forces would have been inevitable, and the war would have taken a very different route. Miracle number 2 was a storm of unprecedented fury which broke over Flanders on Tuesday, May the 28th. It grounded the German Luftwaffe squadrons and enabled the British Army formations, which were between 8 and 10 miles from Dunkirk, to move to the coast in the darkness of the storm and heavy rain, without much interruption from aircraft, which were unable to operate in such conditions. The Führer had obviously not taken the weather into account, nor the God who controls the weather. And the third miracle was that, despite the storm in Flanders, a great calm which had rarely been experienced before settled over the English Channel during the days which followed, and its waters became as still as a mill pond. And it was this extraordinary calm which enabled the vast army of small ships, big ships, warships, privately owned motor cruisers from British rivers and estuaries, in fact almost anything that would float, to ply back and forward in a desperate bid to rescue as many men as possible. To a large extent, the German air squadrons were unable to intervene, certainly not in force, nor in the way that Hitler had anticipated, because many of these squadrons remained grounded. And by the time the German army was finally ordered to renew its attack, over 338,000 troops had been snatched from the beaches, many of whom were to return 4 years later to liberate France. I suppose that there will be people who will regard it as no more than a coincidence. But it was not considered that at the time. Sunday, June the 9th, 1940, was declared a national day of thanksgiving, and encouraged by Churchill himself, the phrase "the miracle of Dunkirk" began to circulate. Today we live in a world where people are either very cautious about miracles from God or rule them out altogether. Many would say that although some might pray, there is no God who can answer. I believe that the events of Dunkirk challenge us about the secular, godless society in which we now find ourselves. And looking at the challenges which face us with the problem of the coronavirus, the idea of praying to the living God for deliverance, of crying out to Him in our need, is something which believers need to be doing, as well as sharing the need with others. In many ways, Dunkirk stands as an extraordinary encouragement to Christians to pray in faith. However great our problems, God is greater than them all. He knows what we are going through, and He calls His people in the midst of all that's going on to cry out to Him in believing prayer. Dunkirk reminds us that God does answer prayer, and that He is a God of miracles, even today. I leave with you the Lord's words which we find in 2 Chronicles chapter 7 verse 14. If my people, who are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Please pray, and do expect God to answer.